what philosophy is and why you should care. I studied philosophy in college, if that means anything. And the other day I was talking with some kid and we were just playing basketball and, I asked him what his major was and I told him what I was studying and I told him I was studying philosophy. He was like, "Oh God, like somebody else in philosophy now." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, the other day I spoke with some dude who also is starting to study philosophy. And he's just been hearing like a lot of people get into philosophy." And I'm like, "Really? Wow. Okay, dope." To me, obviously, I'm biased, right? So I think we need philosophy now more than ever. So the fact that he said that actually made me really happy. And so I just kind of felt like making a video on what philosophy is because I just feel like a lot of the education system doesn't really know how to exactly teach philosophy because it's just a subject that has a lot more to do than just academia or just the intellect. Philosophy is a philosophy is a whole thing. It's not just like working on your mind, but philosophy should work on your body, your mind, and your spirit. All three, right? Not just your mind. And I think school really has this idea of uh putting philosophy into like just the intellectual box. Like obviously, yes, philosophy is very intellectual, but it doesn't take account to the intellect of the spirit and the intellect of the body, which they each have their own intellect besides the mind, right? So I guess I just want to give like kind of my perspective on what I think philosophy is. And I think it could probably help some of you guys gain some insight or some value. At least that's my goal, anyways. And just remember that I'm just expressing my truth, right? I'm just expressing my perspective on what it is. Everybody who studies philosophy is going to have their own way of thinking about how philosophy should be or what philosophy is. So just keep that in mind and just take whatever resonates with you, right? Take whatever you find to be the most truthful for yourself. Question everything I say. I'm not saying something that is absolute truth or that shouldn't be questioned. Literally question everything I say and you know try to apply if you are going to take something apply the wisdom for yourself and see if it actually works or not. We're all kind of in this together and we're all trying to learn together, right? So it's not just me coming on here and saying this and uh trying to be the fucking authority of fucking philosophy or whatever, but again, just my perspective. Take whatever resonates with you because that's going to be probably very important to look into to your own life. When things resonate, that means that there's something to that that should be examined because it has something to do with your life. It resonated, it connected to you for a reason. So just keep that in mind. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick starter pack of philosophy really quick. And that way I can tie this starter pack into the way I truly believe philosophy to be. So let's start down with the word itself, philosophy, and break that down. Philosophy stands for philosophia, which stands for love of wisdom. Wisdom will just give the definition of the application of knowledge for the good, right? And then a basic definition of philosophy would just a very general one would be the study of the fundamental questions of nature, reality, existence, etc. So questions like what is the meaning of life? Does a God exist? What is time? What is love? What does it mean to be in love? Questions like this, right? Very deep and fundamental questions. Okay, so that right there is just that starter pack. You're always going to get that in an intro to philosophy course or just when anybody is introducing philosophy. Okay, so now what does that have to do with our lives and why is it important? And basically, philosophy is essentially all about learning and growing as a person. And to put it more simply, or to be more specific, it's through this uh, process of deep questioning and deep contemplation, you become a better person and live a better quality of life. And this is the goal of philosophy. This is the main purpose of philosophy. Philosophy is a transformative process, right? If you're actually doing philosophy, you're going to change, right? If you haven't changed, if you haven't gotten better as a person, uh, if you're not a more loving person, if you're not a more peaceful person, if your thinking isn't more rational, then you're not really doing philosophy. And so that right there, I think, is the purpose and the essence of philosophy. Now in philosophy, what philosophy really works on is it improves the skill of questioning and thinking. Through this improvement in thinking, you have a better tool or better ability to examine your life. And so when you examine your life and you kind of ask yourself like, how can I be a better person today? Or where did I go wrong here? You can start to see how by being more precise, more clear in your thinking, you can start to really work on your weaknesses and your flaws. And this is what ends up leading you to have more wisdom, right? Become a better person. So in philosophy, we're not so much worried about the answer. And a lot of people get this confused because it's like, oh, what's the point of us talking about this if we never get to a concrete answer? But rather it teaches you how to ask the right questions, how to ask better questions, right? Is your question too vague? Can it be more specific? Is your question even relevant to what we're talking about? And etc. And over time, as you work on asking better questions, you start to seek better answers and the answers you're really looking for. Questions are half of the answer, right? So, depending on what question you have, leads to what answer you get. So, it's really important that you're asking the right questions because it dictates what you're going to come out with in your response. So, just remember that half of the answer is the question, right? So, I would say philosophy is like a journey of self discovery because you're constantly questioning the world and what it means to you and what you truly think about the world. And I'll explain more why I think it's like a self-discovery process, almost like how art is. All right. Next is about arguments. Now, in philosophy, there's a ton of arguments, a ton of theory, but philosophy isn't so much about the arguments, but rather how to have a fruitful discussion where when you conversate with another person, you're both coming out of that conversation with something, having learned something. So when people get this confused, like, oh, like, let me try to beat you and like prove that my view is the correct one. It's not so much about that, but it's rather coming from a standpoint of what can I learn from this person? Or what truth can both of us come to an agreement to? And through this process of having multiple discussions, including with yourself, right, in solitude, thinking to yourself, as you have more and more discussions, you start to reiterate, you start to refine your thinking, you start to get a more complete understanding of the world. And that is the point of discussions in philosophy, to learn together, to gain perspectives from other people. And then once you get these new perspectives and these pieces of information, you can start to connect them and then start to gain a more complete understanding of the world, right? In a lot of other subjects, right? For example, in like a science, you would just typically use the lens of science to focus on whatever it is you're studying. But in philosophy, philosophy really emphasizes looking at many different perspectives, looking at the pros and cons of each perspective, and then kind of adding all those up together to come up with your own unique way of thinking. Um, Whatever you find is true for yourself. And again, that adds to why it's like a process of self-discovery. So philosophy really teaches you how to think for yourself, right? So you're not just like consuming in things and just taking it for face value. You gain the skill of reflection, and whenever something, some sort of information comes to you, you start to evaluate the pros and cons of it. Now, philosophy is unlike other subjects because it's not just you're not just gaining knowledge, right? When you do the process of philosophy, you're not just gaining knowledge, but you're gaining wisdom, right? And wisdom and knowledge are different. You can have knowledge without wisdom, but you can't have wisdom without knowledge. And essentially, you can know a certain piece of information, but whether you apply it correctly or not, or whether you apply it at all to your life, is kind of what wisdom is about. Wisdom is about applying the knowledge and applying it for the good. And a lot of people nowadays, they'll know a lot of stuff, right? Because we have the internet. But when it comes to the application of the knowledge, it's not so much a focus or something that's emphasized. Philosophy really works on this, ideally, on this application of how you're using the knowledge. And now the wisdom is not something that you just kind of remember, short term in your short term memory, and then just, when somebody gives you a test, you just write it and copy it out, and then, that's it, like you're done. And then you forget it the next week. Wisdom is a lot more deeper than that. And that's why the school systems do a terrible job at teaching philosophy, right? And it's because wisdom is something that you learn very deeply. It's something that is within your body, your mind, and your spirit, not just something you remember in your mind, but it's in your body, it's in your actions, the actions you take, it's in your spirit, what thoughts you have, what words you use, and it's also in your mind, which is also included in um with thoughts as well, your feelings. So wisdom is a complete embodiment, and if you're not completely embodying the wisdom, then you haven't really learned. And I think a lot of the philosophy in schools, they don't really preach that, right? They kind of just there's this thing called analytic philosophy where they get really technical and they just focus on the nitty gritty, the definitions, the really technical stuff. But when it comes to changing as a person, becoming a better person, bettering your life, um, they don't really do that. They don't really focus on that. They just completely forget it. So it's like they're missing the whole fucking point of philosophy. It is really about embodying the wisdom. You really start to learn to trust yourself, what's right for you. So you have to be your own teacher, and philosophy really teaches you that. It really helps you with that because you can't have a fulfilling life unless you learn how to think for yourself. There's very basic definitions on what happiness is, but what does happiness mean to you, right? What gives you joy? What makes you feel loved? And so it's important that you do contemplate these questions because if you don't, then you can't really find out who you truly are and what you truly want from life and how you want to live. That's why they kind of say philosophy is a way of life. Now, I want to touch on this philosophy being a self discovery, a self exploration process. In ancient Greece, they had this very popular building. I'll put a picture up on the screen. And basically, in front of the building, they had the phrase, know thyself. Now we have to think about that, right? Now we have to contemplate that, right? Out of everything they could have put, they decide to put know thyself. Obviously, they found it really important to know thyself, to know yourself. And I think philosophy is the process of knowing yourself, right? When you are really questioning things and questioning things at a deep level, you really start to gain a deeper understanding of yourself. And this deeper understanding of yourself is essentially wisdom. And I think the philosophy journey and the spiritual journey are one and the same thing. And if they're not, there's definitely a lot of crossover, but I believe that they're one and the same thing, right? If we think about the most fundamental and an important question in spirituality, it's who am I? And you can see how this ties into know thyself. Who am I? Know thyself, right? When you ask yourself, who am I? That is literally you trying to get to know yourself, trying to get to know the self, I, right? So when you contemplate who am I, right? You tend to grow spiritually. So that's why I think that the philosophy journey and the spiritual journey are the same thing. I know in my personal experience, as I got deeper into philosophy or as I contemplated life at a deeper level or just more frequently, I would find that I would grow spiritually as well. And vice versa. As I would grow spiritually, I would also get better philosophically. I would um, become more aware of things, and there's a lot of crossover between the two for sure. Just as a plus, meditation helps a lot with becoming better philosophically or a better thinker. And that's a whole separate video, but just wanted to add that there. On top of all that, right, if you think about Plato's allegory, his famous allegory of the cave, the dude's basically having a spiritual awakening. Like he's literally like talking about coming out, everything is dark, boom, everything is light. And if you know anything about spirituality, a lot of it is gaining awareness, seeing things for what they are. When you grow spiritually, you also grow in wisdom, which is literally the definition of philosophy. Again, a lot of crossover. And I think, the school system does not talk about this spiritual aspect of philosophy whatsoever, right? I've talked to professors and, when I've asked them like, "Oh, like this this right here, like is this spiritual?" Like literally I was talking about the allegory of the cave. I'm like, "Yo, is this spiritual? Like it seems pretty fucking spiritual to me." And they kind of just disregarded it because they just are so stuck in the system and just so stuck to just thinking about things intellectually and forgetting about the spirit and the body that, like they just disregarded that aspect completely. And that's why I think in school you're stuck in a certain way of thinking. There's certain boundaries, certain restrictions that can't allow you to philosophize truly, right? Because if you're going to philosophize truly, you can't have no boundaries. You can't have no restrictions. You have to be able to ask the deepest questions. You have to be able to think in many different ways, not just in one strict way. And so that's why I think that school just does a complete disservice to philosophy. And clearly, right, it's like that's why you don't have to go to school to be a philosopher or become better philosophically. Even though I went to school for philosophy, it doesn't matter, right? I would say I grew more philosophically on my own. School just helped me a little bit with kind of giving me just the material, but I really did all the learning on my own. And life itself is the best teacher. You have to use life entirely as something, you have to look at life as something to learn from. Everything in life, whether you're out with your friends, whether you're in a book, whether you're watching a movie, it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're playing golf. The attitude of philosophy is, what is the lesson here? Where can I learn? And if you're somebody who, has a lot of experience but has never read a book, then, maybe you should read a book and see how it helps your understanding of the world. Or vice versa, if you're somebody who's just straight into books and doesn't have much life experience, and hey, like, go out and experience life, I'm sure you'll learn a lot about yourself. So it's really a balance and using life as a whole to learn from, not disregarding any aspect. And again, school just really has this thing on just using the intellect and that's it. We forget about training the body. We forget about training the spirit, which is all a part of philosophy. Again, philosophy is a way of life. And again, I think schools just completely missed that. And now like I said, the attitude, talk about the attitude of philosophy, because there's a certain way you have to, certain mindset you have to do philosophy or whatever. And it's really about being curious about the world. There's a quote from Socrates that's famous, but it's, wonder is the feeling of a philosopher, and philosophy begins in wonder. You have to wonder, you have to ask, what if? What if I can be a better person? What if life can change? What if time isn't what I thought it was? Or what if love isn't what I thought it was? But also a certain sense of intellectual humility, right? You have to be humble to be like, "Oh, okay, like, I thought this is what love meant, but now I'm starting to see that love is not what I thought exactly." And to kind of support that intellectual humility, another quote from Socrates is, "The only true knowledge is to know that you know nothing." Talking, about we're in these finite bodies, in these finite minds, right? And there's only so much you can know. So when you ask yourself the question like, "What is love?" It's a something, a word we use, a concept we use all the time. But you have to be lower. You have to lower yourself and humble yourself and be like, okay, maybe I don't really know what this thing love is. Like, maybe there's something more to it. Maybe there's something I have to learn about it. And that takes a certain sense of humility. And I would say the last thing is like being open minded. You have to be open minded. If you're not open to anybody in discussion, if you're just closed off and you think you know everything, then you're not going to learn anything, right? So you have to be open to learning from anybody. You don't have to talk to just because somebody has a PhD in philosophy or whatever, it doesn't mean that, they're know all or they're smarter than, there's people who are homeless or janitors that work at school that are wiser than people in the top of academia. That doesn't matter. Just having a degree doesn't matter. It's about the true wisdom within here and within here. All right, guys. So that's gonna be it. I kind of went a little bit all over the place. I kind of said a lot, but I just kind of tried to touch on the main points that I thought were really overlooked in philosophy. But yeah, if you're still watching the video, I appreciate you and I love you. It means a lot to me. These videos just mean a lot to me in general because I find like this is what I think people don't know and need to know. And so I find them very meaningful and hopefully, I provided some sort of value, insight, or perspective or just company. I don't know. But anyways, and last thing, if you're in a hard time right now, hang in there, things will get better. And I promise you that everyone's kind of going through a hard time right now, but things are starting to get a lot better in my eyes, at least in my perspective. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. I appreciate you all. I love you all. And take care of yourselves and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.